From cave wall hands to the printing press, empires rose in a giant mess. Silk road spice and a compass spin. Humans kept inventing trouble again. A pharaoh blinked and a kingdom fell. Romans built roads and aqueducts well. Mongols rode through half the earth, changing maps for what it's worth. We mapped the stars, crossed every sea, argued on what gods could be. Trade, revolt, philosophy, history's one big conspiracy. It all started with a buffer. Wait! The Buffer History Podcast, where timelines crash and cultures talk back. From Delhi courts to Viking raids to Cold War spies and samurai blades. We got revolutions, treaties, kings, tiny events changing everything. One bad border, one coup, one chart, and suddenly the whole world falls apart. So gather round, don't lose the plot, cause history's way weirder than we were taught. The past ain't dead, it's broadcasting live on Buffer History tonight.
Imagine waking up tomorrow, looking out your window, and realizing the street you've lived on your whole life is suddenly, well, a hostile foreign country.
Yeah, that's just a terrifying thought.
Right. I mean, the local police force is gone. The national military is nowhere to be seen. Your neighbors, like people your family has traded with for generations, are suddenly arming themselves.
And there is literally no government coming to protect you.
Exactly. And in mid-August of 1947, for over 10 million people on the Indian subcontinent, that wasn't some hypothetical nightmare. I mean, that was reality.
It's the absolute definition of a geopolitical earthquake, honestly. The British Empire, after centuries of rule, hastily withdrew.
They just left.
They did. They left behind the newly independent dominions of India and Pakistan, and what immediately followed was a tsunami of human suffering. You had 10 to 15 million people frantically fleeing across these newly drawn borders to reach what was supposedly their promised land.
The scale of the fallout is just, it's almost impossible to comprehend. We are talking about up to 1 million defenseless people, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, murdered in the streets, on trains, or dying of starvation and disease and all the ensuing chaos.
Yeah, the human cost is staggering.
It really is. And it left a legacy of trauma that literally shapes the nuclear-armed tensions in South Asia to this very day, you know?
Absolutely. And it leaves historians grappling with a really devastating, highly contentious question. When a tragedy of this magnitude occurs, who is actually responsible?
Right, like, was it Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, or the British Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, or maybe some volatile, fatal combination of all of them?
That is the big question.
So to find the answer, we are looking into several acclaimed historical accounts today. Books like Freedom at Midnight, The Sole Spokesman, and Shameful Flight. We're going to explore the backroom deals, the intense constitutional chess matches, and the catastrophic logistical failures that led to partition. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good. I mean, to understand the mechanics of this collapse, we really have to start with the Indian leaders on the ground, the ones who were staring down the barrel of this division in the spring of 1947.
Right.
Take Mahatma Gandhi. In Freedom at Midnight, the sheer agonizing desperation of Gandhi to avoid partition is just incredibly vivid. I mean, he basically begged the viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, not to divide India.
He warned that doing so would mean shedding rivers of blood, right?
Exactly, which is a really heavy warning coming from the global icon of nonviolence.
Yeah, no kidding. But he didn't just offer moral warnings. He actually proposed a mechanical solution, didn't you? Like a way to fundamentally alter the power structure to keep the map intact.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a solution that completely shocked Mountbatten. Gandhi proposed handing the entire government of India over to this fierce political rival, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League.
Wait, seriously?
Yep, hand the whole thing over.
That is a staggering systemic shock. I mean, Gandhi was essentially proposing to place 300 million Hindus under the administrative rule of the Muslim minority.
Just to keep the geographic and political unity of the state intact.
It's the geopolitical equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover, where the CEO voluntarily hands the entire company over to their fiercest rival purely to stop the board of directors from liquidating the assets. Like, Gandhi preferred to give the baby entirely to the Muslim League rather than letting the British cut it in half.
It was an incredible gamble. But, you know, Mountbatten quickly recognized it as a political non-starter. He knew the Indian National Congress, led by figures like Jawaharlal Nehru, would never accept Gandhi's extreme concession.
Right, they'd never go for it.
Never. But more immediately, Mountbatten was entirely focused on the brick wall that was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Because during the first 2 weeks of April 1947, Mountbatten and Jinnah held 6 intense face-to-face meetings totaling almost 10 hours of debate.
Wow, 10 hours. And Mountbatten was infamous for his ego and his belief in his own personal charisma.
Oh, totally.
He actually called his persuasive efforts with Indian leaders Operation Seduction. He honestly thought he could charm his way out of a centuries-old geopolitical knot.
He really did. He tried every trick in the diplomatic playbook. I mean, he tried logic, charm, appeals to Jinnah's legacy. He later admitted he completely exhausted his arsenal trying to shake Jinnah's determination to have a partition Pakistan.
But nothing worked.
Nothing made a dent. Mountbatten eventually realized he was just bouncing off an immovable object.
What blows my mind reading about Jinnah in these accounts is the physical contrast to that political immovability. We picture this towering, robust titan of history, but Jinnah was a frail, severely ill man at this point, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very sick.
His physician noted he was essentially surviving on sheer willpower, whiskey, and cigarettes, yet he held the fate of the subcontinent in his hands and absolutely refused to blink.
He did. But, that sheer willpower masked a tragic flaw. And it was a flaw Jinnah actually shared with his primary rival, Nehru. Both of these men were highly educated, cosmopolitan, rational lawyers.
They were brilliant constitutionalists.
Exactly. But they completely misunderstood the emotional reality of the masses they were leading.
They fundamentally underestimated the communal passions that were just simmering on the streets.
Right. Because Nehru and Jinnah were rational political actors, they operated under this false assumption that the public would react to constitutional changes with the same courtroom rationality.
That's a dangerous assumption.
Very. They actually convinced themselves that formally partitioning the country would cool the localized violence rather than ignite it.
Wow.
I know. They took their own desires for a clean, legalistic political transition and mistook them for reality on the ground.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they communicated that sanitized version of reality to Mountbatten,
who was relatively new to the subcontinent, right?
Yeah, he lacked deep institutional knowledge of its fault lines.
So their blind spot was massive. But here's where it gets really interesting mechanically. What was Jinnah actually negotiating for?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because we have this image of him as the unstoppable architect of a separate Pakistan. But reading Aisha Jalal's book, The Sole Spokesman, the mechanics of his actual demand are completely counterintuitive. It's like threatening to break up a country to get a better deal inside it.
Yeah, let's break down the constitutional framework Jalal outlines. As the British prepared to withdraw, the ultimate question was where the real power would reside in a newly independent India.
Right.
Would it be a strong centralized government in Delhi? Or a decentralized system where the individual provinces held the real authority?
Because if you have a strong centralized democratic government, the Hindu majority mathematically dominates the Muslim minority permanently.
Exactly. The math doesn't lie. And Jinnah and the Muslim League understood that raw demographic math.
So Jinnah's demand for Pakistan may have originally been the ultimate high-stakes bargaining chip.
Yeah, his goal wasn't necessarily to sever the Muslim-majority provinces from the rest of India. His goal was to demand absolute parity at the center.
Interesting.
He envisioned a decentralized union where a Muslim grouping of provinces and a Hindu grouping of provinces would essentially operate as equal partners at the federal level.
Oh, wow. So he was using the threat of secession as leverage to force a power-sharing agreement.
Precisely.
Which explains the massive geographic paradox of the Pakistan that actually got created. Jinnah himself complained that the final borders gave him a moth-eaten Pakistan.
It was a logistical nightmare.
Totally. Two halves, East and West Pakistan, separated by 1,500 kilometers of hostile Indian territory. I mean, you would literally need a 4-engine aircraft or a weeks-long sea voyage just to travel between the two halves of your own newly formed country.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that geographic absurdity is exactly why Jinnah fought so hard against dividing the massive, diverse provinces of Punjab and Bengal.
Wait, he didn't want them divided?
No, not at all. During his debates with Mountbatten, the viceroy pointed out a raw logistical fact. He said if Jinnah demanded a separate state based on religious majority, then the British would logically have to slice the Punjab and Bengal provinces in half because they had deeply mixed Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim populations.
Which puts Jinnah in a fascinating contradictory position. He's arguing that Hindus and Muslims represent two different nations that cannot live together,
Right.
but simultaneously demanding that the diverse populations of Punjab and Bengal must be kept whole. He explicitly warned Mountbatten that a man is a Punjabi or a Bengali before he is Hindu or Muslim, and that dividing those specific cultures would cause endless bloodshed.
Yeah, and Mountbatten threw that exact contradiction right back in his face. He told Jinnah that by prioritizing regional identity over religious identity, Jinnah had just presented the unanswerable argument for Indian unity,
Oh, wow, checkmate.
basically. But Jinnah was trapped by his own rhetoric. He couldn't back down from the demand for Pakistan, even as the British used his own logic to carve away the wealthiest, most vital parts of the provinces he claimed.
But, if we look at the political mechanics, if Jinnah was ultimately using Pakistan as a bargaining chip to secure a decentralized power-sharing agreement,
Yeah.
why didn't the Congress Party call his bluff? If unity was the ultimate goal, why didn't Nehru and the Congress leadership just agree to a weaker central government to keep the Muslim League in the fold?
Because the Congress Party was playing its own ruthless game of hardball politics. Congress, led by Nehru and Sardar Patel, had a grand vision for a modernized, industrialized India. To achieve that, they believed they absolutely needed a strong, centralized authority.
So they looked at Jinnah's demand for decentralized provincial power and realized it would result in a weak center.
Exactly. A weak center constantly held hostage by regional vetoes.
So Congress did the brutal political math. They realized that keeping India united meant sharing power with Jinnah and severely limiting their own ability to govern from the center.
Jalal's analysis points out that the specter of communal division often obscures this underlying structural conflict between centralism and regionalism. Congress essentially weaponized the crisis.
Weaponized it how?
They decided it was actually more advantageous to amputate the Muslim majority areas,
Mm-hmm.
to just let Jinnah have his moth-eaten Pakistan, because it allowed Congress to impose absolute, unchallenged central authority over the vast majority of the subcontinent that remained.
Man, so Jinnah, this brilliant lawyer, built this intricate constitutional argument for parity, but he completely lost command of his own case when it collided with raw political power.
Yeah, he did.
Congress effectively said, you want your own state, fine, take it. But we are keeping the strong center for ourselves, and we are keeping the non-Muslim halves of Punjab and Bengal.
And so both sides were locked in an incredibly dangerous game of political brinkmanship. They were so focused on the constitutional chess match in Delhi that they completely ignored the powder keg they were building on the ground in the provinces.
Which brings us to the logistics of the actual disaster. The Indian political leaders laid the dry brush with their stubbornness and their elite disconnect, but who actually threw the match?
Yeah, that's the tragedy.
If we want to understand the sheer speed of the collapse, we have to look at the mechanics of the British exit.
And this is where Stanley Rupert's book, Shameful Flight, places the spotlight squarely on Lord Mountbatten.
Because Mountbatten wasn't operating under the August 1947 deadline initially, was he? He had a completely different timeline from the British government.
Right. The British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, had originally given Mountbatten a clear mandate, June 1948.
Oh, okay.
That was the deadline to facilitate an agreement between the competing Indian leaders, draw the necessary borders, untangle the shared military and infrastructure, and safely withdraw the shield of British troops.
I mean, June 1948 gives you over a year. It's still a tight timeline to dismantle a centuries-old empire, but it at least gives you breathing room to manage the logistics of transferring power for 400 million people.
But Mountbatten unilaterally scuttled that timeline.
Just threw it out.
Just threw it out. Wolpert argues that Mountbatten was driven by a toxic mix of adrenaline, impatience, and extreme arrogance. Once he realized he couldn't charm his way to a unified agreement, he essentially decided to cut and run.
Oh.
He slashed 10 entire months off the deadline, rushing the departure date up to mid-August 1947.
He threw away 10 months of planning. 10 months that were desperately needed to map the borders, position security forces, and manage the inevitable mass migration.
It's wild, isn't it?
It's beyond wild. He forced this hyper-accelerated timeline just so he could force the Indian leaders to accept the messy reality, allowing Britain to wash its hands of the fallout.
And the human cost of that accelerated timeline is best illustrated by how the actual borders were drawn, the physical lines of partition.
This is the most enraging logistical failure of the entire history, I think. The boundary commissions were chaired by Sir Cyril Radcliffe, an English jurist. And let's be clear about his qualifications for dividing the complex ancient heartlands of Punjab and Bengal. He had never set foot in India before.
Never. Not once.
It's crazy.
He had no knowledge of the terrain, no understanding of the deep cultural and economic ties of the regions he was tasked with dissecting. And because Mountbatten had artificially compressed the timeline, Radcliffe was given a mere 5 weeks to draw a border for hundreds of millions of people.
5 weeks. It is the geopolitical equivalent of asking a surgeon to separate conjoined twins using a meat cleaver while blindfolded with a ticking stopwatch in the room.
That's exactly what it was.
The mechanics of his task were literally impossible. I mean, he was using outdated census data from 1941. He was looking at archaic maps where rivers had physically changed course over the years.
And virtually every local governor and military official warned Mountbatten that partitioning Punjab and Bengal at this speed without a massive, entrenched security apparatus would unleash a bloodbath.
Right.
But the rushed deadline made careful, block-by-block surveying impossible. Radcliffe's line slashed indiscriminately through farms, through water systems, and right through the middle of villages and families.
Even with those butcher borders, the violence might have been mitigated if the military had been properly deployed. But Mountbatten committed what has to be one of the most fatal PR stunts in modern history regarding those finished maps.
Oh, this part is just brutal.
It really is.
The Radcliffe line was completed a few days before the official August 15th independence ceremonies. But Mountbatten deliberately ordered the boundary maps to be kept under lock and key.
He hid them.
He hid them from everyone, including the governors of the very provinces being divided. He decreed they would not be released until days after Independence Day.
He hid the actual borders of the new countries from the people living in them, purely for the sake of the optics. He wanted the flashbulbs. He wanted the glorious photos of a peaceful transfer of power, with his metal-strewn white uniform looking immaculate on the world stage. He knew that if he released the maps, the inevitable riots would ruin the independence festivities.
The mechanical failure of that decision is just staggering. Because the maps were suppressed, the provincial governors had no idea where the lines were actually going to fall.
Right, so they couldn't plan anything.
Exactly. They couldn't dispatch troops, organize trains, or secure the transit routes. Millions of people celebrated Independence Day on August 15th, only to discover a few days later that the line had been drawn on the wrong side of their house.
And they were suddenly trapped in hostile territory.
Yeah.
When the mobs came, there was no one to stop them. A unit called the Punjab Boundary Force had been cobbled together, but it was drastically undersized. I mean, about 50,000 men to cover an area roughly the size of the state of Indiana, populated by millions of terrified, displaced people.
It was a drop in the bucket.
Utterly useless against the sheer scale of the violence.
The security apparatus just dissolved. The local police forces fractured along religious lines. Hindus and Sikhs were violently driven toward India. Muslims were violently driven toward Pakistan. You had over 10 million people caught in an uncontrolled, unprotected tidal wave of sectarian slaughter.
So what does this all mean? We started with the specific mission today, to look at the evidence compiled by these historians and answer the haunting question of who was actually responsible for the million lives lost and the generational trauma of partition.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical consensus points to a massive, systemic failure of leadership across the board. The blame is widely shared, but it is disproportionately weighted among the key players.
Let's synthesize the verdict then. First, you have Gandhi. His fierce idealism was noble, but his refusal to engage with the pragmatic, messy reality of the communal divide meant he failed to offer a viable roadmap. Offering the whole country to Jinnah was a systemic impossibility that left a vacuum of practical leadership.
True. Then you have the political architects, Nehru and Jinnah. They are highly culpable for treating the fate of millions like an abstract constitutional chess match.
Right. Congress ruthlessly prioritized centralized power over compromise.
And Jinnah engaged in a dangerous game of high-stakes brinkmanship that he ultimately couldn't control. And both men shared a fatal, catastrophic naivete about the masses. They were elite rationalists who completely failed to anticipate the irrational, horrific violence their political hardball would unleash on the streets.
They built the powder keg, and they laid the fuse. But the match was unequivocally Lord Mountbatten.
The ultimate catalyst that turned a fraught political deadlock into a bloody inferno was Mountbatten's timeline.
Yeah.
His vanity, his impatience, and his obsession with a clean PR exit robbed the subcontinent of the 10 months it desperately needed to figure out a peaceful logistical transition.
He knew that his rush to the exit sealed the fate of 1 million people. And even Mountbatten himself recognized this later in life, didn't he?
He did. Years after the fact, in a rare moment of unguarded remorse, when asked about his time as viceroy, he bluntly admitted, "I fed it up."
It is a chilling admission. The ultimate tragedy of partition is realizing it was not an inevitable natural disaster. It was a completely man-made catastrophe born of giant egos, elite miscalculation, and the tragic, arrogant belief that you can carve up a complex civilization with a pen and a rushed deadline.
It's sobering.
It really fundamentally changes the way you look at a map. You look at those solid black lines and realize how fragile and sometimes how arbitrary they really are. And that brings me to a final thought I want you, the listener, to mull over today. Think about the lines of your own city, your own state, or your own country.
That's a great point.
How often are the borders we live within and the hidden generational conflicts we inherit simply the result of a rushed deadline by someone in a distant room? Someone who never had to actually live with the consequences of the line they just drew. It's a haunting mechanical reality of how history is made. Keep questioning the history you think you know, and keep looking closely at the lines you've been told are permanent. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.